I was horrible at setting boundaries. A lot of the moments in which I know I was not performing well is because I was literally overextending myself.
Yeah.
Literally overextending myself. So I do think this notion of taking breaks and setting boundaries and prioritizing your own well-being is actually a signal that should be positive for your team.
Welcome to Leadership Rewired. Allison Allen and Dean Martin invite you to join them for an honest conversation that brings a personal perspective to the issues of leadership.
Welcome back to the Leadership Rewired podcast, where we challenge traditional leadership norms and we hopefully show up in time to support our leadership community that we're trying to build in a way that's purposeful and authentic. I'm Allison Allen, and I am always supported, co-hosted in partnership with Dean Martin, who is here.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Today we're going to dive into our third episode of our 5-part series focused on mental health and well-being and social connection. You might remember in the first episode, we talked a lot about really establishing the definition of what mental health is. We talked a little bit about the difference between mental health and mental illness. Yeah. And more specifically, we talked about the leader's role in mental health and support of employees. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, it is out there. Please take a look, give us your feedback. And hopefully there's some nice nuggets. So far, the feedback has been really great. Some nice nuggets that you can take away. Our second episode was focused on psychological safety, where we got an opportunity really to break down this huge word that's often thrown around, which is really about this notion of giving employees and team members the opportunity to be able to be authentic and say what they feel and challenge norms and do things that are different in a way that feels safe.
Yeah.
So again, second episode will be out for you guys to hear and listen to this week. And this is our third episode. So Dean, we're talking about leadership, and we would, this is technically our first podcast post the election. So how you doing, my friend? How are you? How you feeling?
Well, I will answer that, Allison. I think I just want to say for people who are just listening to us and don't watch on YouTube, they would not know that both of us have turned up in our white t-shirt. I feel like I'm getting ready for a baptism or something, or I don't know, some kind of spiritual ceremony. But maybe like, are we the good angels? I'm not sure, Allison.
But, I love that.
Are we the good angels? Are we going to use our power for evil or for good?
We're going to use our power for good.
For good, yeah. Yes. I mean, it's been, I mean, you and I have had a little bit of a chat since those election results, which I know will, we don't quite know what the future holds, but we know enough to anticipate the impact on communities and on people we care about and on ourselves. Like personally, it has been hard for me. I have felt overwhelmed. I think I said to you, it reminds me a little bit of like when my mother died and feeling that grief and thinking that there was almost nothing that would make me feel better in that moment. Like maybe a cup of tea or a kind word from a friend or a walk or a good sleep.
Yeah.
But when those things are over, you're still in it.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I've been sort of focusing on for myself is in amongst these feelings and whilst, supporting and loving other people who also I think are completely overwhelmed too and have a lot of strong reactions. How can I return to a sense of me that I enjoy? What's the favorite subjective experience of Dean being Dean that I love? What can I do? What are those little things? So micro moments. I enjoy encouraging other people. I enjoy learning. I like the feeling of anticipating something where I can have a positive impact. So looking for little moments to do that, even whilst you're within this big state of like, is there anything I can do right now that's really going to shift it? Probably not. Right. But for right now, maybe these few days or so, I'm really focusing on that.
Mm-hmm.
How are you? How's your heart, Allison?
It hit me pretty hard. I think I binge watched some show that I never watched before. I think it was like, it was really a show that was centered around people who have decided to live off the, what do you call it? Live off the
grid?
It's basically live off the grid.
Right.
So it was love off the grid.
Oh, right. Okay.
Like, nice. I mean, not a show that I would ever, I'm never living off the grid. That's not me. But there was something about it, watching it.
Yeah.
But I binge watched that. And then I had to come out of it because I needed to be there for my kids. And they were processing, and my friends were processing, and my community were processing. And so it's taken me a minute, but I got a chance to spend the weekend with some people at a social event. It was a global community of people all celebrating a really great friend. And I had no idea how much I needed that. I, danced. We didn't talk about anything heavy. We kept it light. It was all in celebration of her, and it was needed.
Yeah.
It was almost like I made 25 new friends just by being in this experience. And somehow I left that with some very positive energy.
Yeah.
And so getting back to the work, I think, is what's most important. I think getting back to this podcast and having these conversations in some respects is like a opportunity to continue to contribute to good. Yeah. And I do think it's kind of funny that we both showed up in white today. We always compliment each other in our color. It's not coordinated at all, folks.
No.
But there's something about like needing light and needing positive energy, and I believe that's what you and I are. And so needed some time to sort of like dust ourselves off. And I'm not saying there won't ever be moments in which we are thrown off again. But I think we need to continue to do the work and lift up leaders and give leaders help.
Yeah.
Especially over this time, it's going to be really interesting. And so I think we have a charge to do that. And that's kind of what I'm signing up for.
Yeah. I'm signing up for that too. And like I've said to you many times, doing this podcast with you is one of the great joys in my life, because of what it feels like for me, what I can contribute, and then also, how we can have a positive impact on other people. So let's keep on doing that, not look at what yet still needs to happen or be overwhelmed by a larger context.
Yep.
To sort of have that blurred out in the background, and then to be laser focused on who are the leaders who are showing up, who are the people who really want to do great stuff for themselves, for their businesses, for their people. That's our calling. Let's go.
Yeah, 100%.
So ready for this episode. So this is the third in 3.
Yes.
Nurturing mental health 1, psychological safety 2. This one is really about talking to leaders and saying, like, how can they transform workplace health practices? What does workplace wellness look like? We would say the kicker here, the real kind of leadership rewired piece is that this starts from the top. It moves from the top down. And when we talk about workplace wellness, to be quite clear around that, that's what is that environment that's been created that's more than just, implementing a meditation app or giving our employees a discount to a gym membership or something like that. This is about what are you doing as a leader that is creating an environment that is doing 3 things in particular. It is supporting your people physically, because they're still bodies, mentally and emotionally. What are those actions that you can take? And some of them may be a little bit more around policies and processes, but really this episode, we're talking now about how does it roll from the top down? We believe it starts with you, wherever you are, whichever level of leadership you're at. So Allison, so what are your thoughts about leaders setting the tone? Is that an outrageous rewiring that we're going with here?
No, and I think one thing that remains consistent is that leaders do set the tone for workplace culture. They basically signal to their teams and everybody around them what is going to be the culture of that organization.
Yeah.
So if they prioritize wellness, not just with words, but through actions, it has a ripple effect through the organization.
Yes.
So it really shouldn't be sugarcoated, especially now.
Yeah.
It's so important that leaders demonstrate, authenticity, vulnerability, and quite frankly, strategic intent.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you are, doing something, saying something, modeling something, you need, and you say this all the time, be really, really clear why you're doing it so that people around you understand why.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that they know that you are attempting to
Sure.
demonstrate something that they would like to see within the organization.
Yeah. I do say that. I was about to say, yeah, I really like that, Allison. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
I say that too. So I'm just like
You
complimenting
say it a
myself.
lot.
But I was just thinking as you were talking as well, employees aren't necessarily thinking about what is the workplace wellness culture in which I'm operating. They don't think about that. They're just on the receiving end of leaders and teams and people. So this modeling is done kind of tacitly. It's implied. So that's why we do want to be explicit and actually say, and encourage leaders to say, be explicit in saying, hey, this is why I'm operating in this way, because I care about how you're feeling physically, or I want to have a positive impact on you in terms of how you are processing things mentally. What's your workload like? So to be explicit. Another thing for us to consider, though, if we're saying employees are watching, whether they realize it or not, is what is the impact of remote or hybrid working on that? And I was thinking about, of all of our unconscious biases. There's so many, it's just how our brains work. Our brains are always looking for efficiencies, so shortcuts, which are sometimes helpful and also not so helpful. There's a bias called a distance bias, where, and we are all sometimes prone to this, but specifically for a leader to think about, is distance bias coming into play with me? Because that is where we unintentionally favor employees who are closer to us over those who are further away. And if you think about even back in the days when we were all working in an office environment, often the employee who sat closest to the manager was the one who was like, they'd get up and go, hey, can I ask you a quick question? That one would be closer, rather than I need to go and speak to that guy on floor 3. Much less I need a Zoom call with the guy who's working in Ohio and I'm in New York. Much less, oh my goodness, those guys in Hyderabad, they haven't even woken up yet. I'm not going to call them. So if we're thinking about like, how are you modeling these behaviors? Let's bring it back. Workplace wellness. What can you do as a leader? All of your people need to see this. How are you being intentional and then jumping on a call deliberately for those who are working remotely or in a different time zone, making sure that they can actually see your behaviors? You'll have to show that a little bit more deliberately.
What's interesting about what you just said is that, what popped in my mind is that global leadership piece. And I've never heard of the reference of distance bias. So that's really interesting to me, which, by the way, as you were also talking, I was thinking to myself, you can demonstrate distance bias even if everybody is remote. Who is the person that you're always calling out, shouting out to, always acknowledging, always, pointing to, hey, get back to me on that. And that could be perceived that everybody else on the virtual call isn't as relevant or as important, or that you have, dare I say, a favorite.
Because that person is maybe, if you're on Slack, they always have their little green button, so they have that kind of response time. Or maybe they're in your time zone. You're all working East Coast. So those are the people who, when you're working 9 o'clock in the morning and the West Coast hasn't come in yet, you're like, well, I'll just speak to him. Of course, he's going to answer us. So being very.
So what are some skills, or what are some things that since you've introduced that to the podcast?
Sure.
But which I love, by the way, I had never heard of it, but what are some things that you would suggest that leaders do to get over something like that? I mean, they may not even know that they're doing it. The person who's sitting right next to them, is always sitting right next to them. So they do defer to them and they're always ready and available to help. So what are some ways in which they can do better around that.
Right. I think there's a combination of things here. I would say one behavior that will really help leaders to implement this workplace wellness is active listening.
Mm.
And by active, we mean paying attention to not just the words that are being said, but being proactive in, tone, body language, etc. But that also requires a going out of your way to solicit that feedback or to implement processes that would make sure you doing a regular pulse check or you have some kind of a feedback loop. So in saying that, I'm saying I really want leaders to also think about, in my active listening, what's the frequency of my contact with my people? And maybe that even requires a quick little audit. Have a look. How many directs you have? Oh, I've got 9 directs. Do I have one-to-ones with each of them? Or are there some of them who I'm seeing more frequently in meetings? Like, you can do a quick little jot it down on a piece of paper and actually go, I'm working on 4 projects with 5 of them. Those other ones I seldom see. We just have a weekly one-to-one. If I'm gonna be doing this good active listening to check in on their mental health, their physical health, their well-being, I'm gonna have to make myself just a little bit more available. And that doesn't mean in time. It doesn't now mean now I have to put on a 1-hour meeting with each of them. But it's about I need to be available in terms of my presence. When I am connecting with them, I really need to have my wits about me and be listening out for what is being said, what is not being said. And specifically now we're talking about wellness, but that applies for everything. But I think that's one way in which we can overcome this distance bias, is to have a quick look and go, as I'm automatically checking in with somebody, or if I'm reflexively going, I'll just ask her, let me see, are there any other people who I might have missed? Or is this that important that I have to Slack this person now? Or could I put it in an email for my colleagues who are in San Diego who can pick it up in 3 hours?
Right.
Is it that important that I must get a response? So how about you?
Sometimes it is important, and you're just going to go to a person that you go to all the time. But I love the point that you made around really just sort of like assessing the current situation.
Yeah.
Am I defaulting to someone? Am I always going to the same person?
Yeah.
Is that person even burnt out because they're always the one that I'm going to, and how do I sort of use my one-on-ones and my active listening skills to maybe figure out other places in which I can lean into other team members and in essence, spread the wealth.
Yeah.
I was curious about your thoughts on, a lot of the data says that leaders can obviously demonstrate, great well-being and, social connections by, they themselves modeling. So leaders taking breaks, leaders having one-on-ones or impromptu one-on-ones, leaders engaging people in a much more holistic and team fashion. What do you think about this idea of leaders setting boundaries and prioritizing their own well-being?
I love it.
Okay, so talk to me about, like, 1, why you love it, and 2, what would be some concerns that you would have about the signals that could be, signals that could go to the team?
Yeah. So I think when we talk about setting boundaries are for us.
Yeah.
They're not for others.
That's what I mean. So the leader is setting boundaries for themselves.
Yeah. So a little footnote here or a whatever. Check out if you haven't listened already to our podcast on self-care. That's a biggie where we say, like, if you really have a good understanding of yourself or self-love, then you know what are the conditions under which you're going to flourish. So that sort of feeds into my answer here. But I think in order to set boundaries for yourself, we're talking about mental health and wellness here. This is then saying, how will I be able to show up well? What do I need physically? So are there times in which I need to set a boundary and say, actually, I can't work beyond these hours, or I'm not going to work in this kind of way because it's too stressful on me.
Right.
And if you know that about yourself, then it doesn't have to be a reactive, like, oh, you've transgressed this boundary and now I'm going to sort of reprimand somebody in my team because how dare they have messaged me at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
The messaging is not around you may not do this to me, I've set a boundary, but rather, hey, you're in my team. I want to make sure I'm functioning at my most coherent, or I want to make sure that I'm not pushing myself beyond my physical limits. I've put into place a practice where, for example, I'm not going to get online before 9 a.m. That's what you're going to see. And if you do message me, that's okay. I'm picking it up at 9.
Right.
So that's I'm loving myself here, and the way in which it's articulated can be done in not a reprimand or like, how dare you? Who do you think you are telling me to do this? But like, hey, this will keep me safe. And then you can add on to it. And I would encourage you to do the same. Or say, I remember being with leaders, Allison, where somebody would say, hey, I'm going home now. It's 4:00. We've had a hell of a week. I would encourage you to do the same. And they didn't make me leave, but they would say, I encourage you to do the same. So I think in setting of boundaries, that is something that leaders can explicitly say, hey, this is what I've done in order to make sure I'm at my best mentally, physically, emotionally. This is how I will respond if that boundary is, pushed up against. This is how I would love to support you doing something similar.
What's so interesting about the boundaries conversation is I think if you polled leaders, a lot of them would say that they hear from their teammates or the team members on their team that they leader have crossed the boundary, right? Yeah. They're often being told that, team members or certain people have boundaries. And I think in some respects, what we're saying here is that it's okay for leaders to have boundaries as well. Yeah. And they need them. I was not great at this at all. I have to say, I have a global team. I'm going to be available to that global team 24/7. Sure. I'm going to do my one-on-ones as all the time. I'm going to try to be available for projects. If people have questions or complaints, I was horrible at setting boundaries. Right. And I think a lot of the moments in which I know I was not performing well is because I was literally overextending myself. Yeah. Literally overextending myself. So I do think this notion of taking breaks and setting boundaries and prioritizing your own well-being is actually a signal that should be positive for your team.
Yes.
Because when you show up, you're able to show up. Yeah. You have all of the energy and the thinking that you need to show up in a way that your team needs.
Yeah. And I would say, Allison, I think it would almost be, I don't know, it feels impossible to be a member of a team and to set a boundary for yourself that your manager may transgress or whatever, bump up against, without them having a boundary too. I think that would be really hard. I would be very reluctant as someone in a team to say, hey, here's my boundary, folks. I don't answer emails on a Saturday. If I've never seen my manager set something similar, I would not.
You'd be surprised.
I would just be resentful. Oh, really? Tell me.
No, you would be surprised. There are quite a few people that I worked with and, in recent years who were very good, which, by the way, I didn't ding them for that. I appreciated knowing what was most important to them. And for some reason, I wish it would have triggered to me, hey, you need to set a boundary yourself. But actually, I just said, okay, I know it. I can't call this person between, 7 and 11 o'clock. And I can only call this person from this time in the afternoon. And I'm basically working myself around everybody else's schedule instead of actually going, okay, I appreciate that this person has boundaries and I actually need boundaries myself. What do you think about the notion of leaders being as transparent as they possibly can and also being vulnerable at the same time about their own burnout and managing their stress and with their people? Like, do you think that creates a safe space for employees to open up and maybe share more about what they're feeling when leaders do that?
Yeah, and then will you also answer? I want to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts of that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think yes. I think it's also somewhat conditional. It's kind of like it's like an apology. It's very nice to get, but I want to see a change behavior. So I can be transparent, and I think it's transparency is about I think willingly sharing some insight that would be in service of strengthening the relationship with your team. So I think if we can be very clear around this isn't just that I'm now going to share with you my deepest heart's desires and my failings and my drama and whatever. It's like in service of what? I want to make sure the person in this team knows how hard I've been working or can learn from this. I want to model it and then say, okay, this is what's happened in the last 3 weeks. I've been working on X, Y, and Z. I really have pushed myself. I feel, the migraines are coming back or whatever it is. This is what I'm going to do differently. How have I even impacted on you? I imagine it's been hard because I've not been available or whatever. So you're using that transparency not just as a declaration of like, here's my stuff, deal with my shit.
Right.
But in service of strengthening it, and then to say, I want to model best practice, and then I need to do something about it. Because I still just have a leader telling me every month, oh, I'm so tired. Oh, I'm so tired. Oh, I'm so tired. I'm like, I don't need that transparency anymore. Do something about this.
You're so tired and it's making me tired. Listen to you telling me how tired you are.
It's not right. You feel good.
Right.
So you in transparency, Allison, how have you done that, or how do you think that works well?
No, and I do think that there is something about identifying for people when you're under stress. Otherwise, it may look like you're under stress and you're just taking it out on everybody else. I think being transparent is good. I don't think it's something we want to have happen all the time, to your earlier point. But I think you don't want it to happen all the time because you should be setting boundaries.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so it's like, if you're always stressed 24/7 all the time, people just know that that's the environment that you're creating. And they don't even know, is it this kind of stress today? Or is it that stress over there? Like, I don't know. It just starts looking like a norm.
Yeah.
And I think what we need to do is own it. Hey, I'm under stress. I've got 15,000 things coming at me. Here's what's happening. I haven't set really good boundaries. I need to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the reason why I like it, again, is it starts to create that safe space where perhaps employees, rather than you trying to figure it out, will open up and share when they are under stress.
Yeah. Yeah.
And perhaps you get a chance to get in there and help them sort some things out to help them relieve what that stress could look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I would guarantee in this day and time, there are a lot of people who are just taking on stress because they want to be quiet, or taking on stress because they don't want to get laid off, or taking on stress because they don't want to get fired, or they don't want to be perceived as the weak one.
Yeah.
And what my suggestion would be is, if you are demonstrating or saying, hey, here's what's happening, you will actually not have to be a detective. People will be more honest with you and open with you and say, here's what's happening for me. I could use your help on X, Y, Z.
Yeah. Yeah. I would want leaders to also be doing a quick audit of their own views around how much do they value this appearance of, oh, I'm exhausted. We spoke about this in our first podcast, the one around, wellness. But what's around is, do you actually think it's a good idea for people to be so burnt out? Do you need that? Do you need to see your team exhausted and at the edge? Because if so, you may then inadvertently be also playing into that, going, that's why I want to tell everyone, oh, I'm so tired, I'm exhausted, I stayed late, I'm so stressed, because unconsciously you actually think that's a good thing. So find out where you stand on that.
Yeah, do you think that there are leaders who want, I think I might have asked you when we had this conversation, do you think there are leaders who want to see their people on edge?
Yes.
Like somehow.
Oh, for sure.
What do you think that they get out of seeing their employees on edge? That's such a interesting
Oh,
statement to
I've
me.
heard leaders explicitly say that to me in the past. I think it comes from, I think it's two things. Sometimes we receive, I don't think it's a good thing at all, of course, let's be really clear.
No,
Good
I
luck,
don't think
you're going to
you think
blow them
that.
up, you're going to burn them out.
Right.
But I think it can sort of give that leader, if that leader is very anxious and is really driven hard and is working hard and feels like they are up against it and maybe not doing enough, to at least see that mirrored in their people, I think offers some kind of a comfort. It's short-lived, but it offers a comfort, because if you're the leader going, I've got so much to do and this and no, all these 10 things, and then I look at my people and they look like they're working just really nicely, but then nobody's heads are falling off, then I need to see more urgency. I need to see the fear in their eyes too. So I think that's
wow. But is it like we're all in this together, or is it like if I'm in pain, you should be in pain too?
I think it's a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
So. Yeah. And then.
So what do you say to that leader right now who's listening, who may be right with you? Oh, I want to. Dean's right. That's what I want to see. But then also thinking, whoa, this is probably not good because look at Allison's face.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you say to that? Thank you. What do you say to that leader? Like, is that like right now in this podcast where we're saying modeling well-being and being transparent when you're under stress and taking breaks and, setting boundaries to a leader. Yeah. What do you say to that leader who you believe who does this on purpose?
Well, I would say they may not even do it on purpose, but it's certainly coming out. They may need it unconsciously. So I would say to that leader, this is now raise it into a consciousness and actually go, how are you showing up? How frequently do you find yourself even thinking or saying, I'm exhausted, I'm at my wit's end, I'm tired, like how much is that your story? And then look at the people around you, the people you're leading. Do you favor, inadvertently, are you favoring those who are playing that back to you? Do you actually have a bias against those three who just still comfortably leave at 5?
Wow.
Whereas these ones who are also like, oh God, I work so hard, I'm bleeding from the eyeballs. Am I inadvertently going, oh yes, I love that? So, certainly not good practice here around wanting to drive people to that extent, but it ties in with how we started, which is, if we're talking about workplace wellness, it starts from the top. One mindfulness app or access to employee, support or whatever is not going to really make a shift in your organization unless you're modeling it as a leader. So come back to, how are you looking after yourself? How are you modeling that? And therefore, where might some of your biases or preferences be with your people? It might be there. You may actually see it being reflected in your people. And that's a chance for you to go, okay, I want to shift here. I have a choice to shift. I can keep it like this, or I can actually make a difference, because we know, keeping people in this state is not bringing the best out of them. We're going to lose them, all that good stuff. We know what's going to happen. Yeah.
I was reflecting on something, and I'm going to probably end up writing something about this, but we do a lot of work around, good leadership, bad leadership. And one of the things that I was thinking about was, if you're a good or bad leader, you decide where you are on the sort of, line of good leadership or bad leadership. But the fact remains that if you are a leader that is a micromanager, demanding of your people, pushing your people to the brink, controlling everything that they're doing, not setting good examples, you are not getting good, design, development, good products, programs, or services. You are not. You're getting what you asked for.
Yeah.
You're getting enough. You're getting enough for that person to check a box so they can get you out of their face and they can move on to the next thing that you've assigned them.
Correct.
And I think every organization, especially over the next few years and even more so, wants to compete by building really amazing products that people want to use, really amazing services that organizations will take advantage of. And you have to have people working for you that feel like they are taken care of, that they have the space to think, that they have the space to be creative, that they have the space to challenge norms or stop us from running into a roadblock that we can avoid if we just gave people a chance to think. And the only way you're going to do that is to demonstrate good leadership.
Yeah.
And so I think, for that leader who wants to see their people burnt out, just step back for a second and saying, you're not getting the best out of people.
Yeah.
What you're getting is just what you asked for. And, a completed task just so they can move to the other thing without any thought given to how it could be better, how it could be enhanced, if this is the right thing to do. So, I would say to those leaders also just, sit down with a cup of coffee and just think about how you're currently showing up.
Yeah.
And what are the things from this podcast that you could probably take to start to shift?
Yeah.
It all comes down to profitability, and it all comes down to a capitalistic nature, which I think is just the way the world's going to be for the next couple of years. And you still need to get people to build amazing products, services, offerings.
Yeah.
And you can't do that if you're not taking care of your people.
Yeah.
And that's just the net of that.
Yeah. And they're probably not having very much fun either.
Right.
The experience of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into some really, really practical steps when we think about creating this well-being environment.
Yeah.
One of my favorites, and I know it's one we used to use all the time in leadership development, but, it's literally lead by example. Again, if you're sending, emails at midnight, think to yourself, and you said this earlier, what is that signaling from your boundaries perspective?
Right. Yeah.
What are you saying to people?
Yeah.
And you mentioned active listening earlier.
Yeah.
There is, we have a whole podcast on active listening, but it's really this notion of understanding what your employees actually need.
Yeah.
Not what you think they need. What do they actually need? Do they need you to sit down with them and have a regular connect or give them feedback? Do they need your direction on prioritization? Sometimes the biggest gift you can give somebody is to tell them what they should focus on.
Yes, yeah.
They want to, if they love working for you, they love working in your team, they've got 5 things, they're like, oh my God, what do you do? Sometimes the biggest gift you can give is just say, do those 2 things, put those other 3 things to the side.
Yeah.
What's some other ones that you can think of, Dean?
Well, I'm thinking about less what the leader can do directly, but how to overcome the challenges of some policies or processes that have been implemented. So, this is still what a leader can do, but it's actually looking at it. Why might my people not be engaging with something that we've created or that's been rolled out in terms of their wellness? And I think it's just to make sure that you as a leader are championing whatever this new program or, method of addressing well-being is, because we know you can start something that's really amazing. And then if it falls off 3 months later, employees are like, yeah, this has failed before. I'm skeptical of this new thing or this new app or whatever. I'm not seeing it role modeled. It's not going to work. I'm not bought into it. So I think that's something a leader can also look at and also play a part in it. Like make sure you know what's being implemented in your organization. If you think I wouldn't want to use it myself, why should we let that come through and now be offered to our employees? So to be like quite, take responsibility there. If I'm asking my people to use a thing because I think it's going to help with their time management or it's going to help them be able to manage their mental stress, would I use it too? If not, you better go speak to somebody. Go speak to somebody in benefits and go and find your influence higher up to say, hey, I can't get behind this. So that's the one, sort of like to overcome those challenges. I think also to think creatively. So this is what a leader can do, is that a budget or a lack of a budget does not necessarily have to be a constraint for you to be implementing something that will have a positive impact on wellness. You've got teams of people. Yes, you may have software developers, or they're all whatever, your lawyers or whatever. There are creatives within this group who would love an opportunity to say, hey, I've got an idea of, can we do a no meeting Friday? Or can we do something with a different time zone? Because I know we're missing out on a lot of our colleagues who are working in Europe. Like, ask your people. That's coming back to the active listening piece. There are lots of questions and great ideas we can get from our teams and from our peers that don't have to cost anything, that would give them the message, hey, I care about this, and that could very simply be implemented. That would have a small but a positive impact on the team.
So we've talked about leading by example. We've talked about active listening. We've talked about leveraging surveys and data to actually drive change. We've talked about talking to your peers and don't be constrained by dollars.
Yeah.
Let me just add two more that I think could be really, really important. I think sometimes we actually wait to celebrate wins when we've delivered a big project or we've delivered a big program. And I think sometimes acknowledgement of the small wins or the small steps or the small progress is actually a big way to keep people hyped, because it demonstrates that you're not just focused on the end state, but that you're going with people through the journey. And you're creating that connection with the team. And the last one I would offer is, if you have remote employees or you happen to be a remote first organization, have virtual chats with individuals. Reach out to people, have a virtual coffee chat, and try to be as flexible when you are having your meetings. I know often I will join an organization and I'll have a global meeting and it's like 10 o'clock Pacific Coast time. And somehow that's the middle of the night for Asia, but that's okay. They've been invited. Let's keep moving. And it's just like, hello, folks. Let's figure out ways to be flexible around our meetings, especially when we have remote global employees. And the other thing that I would offer, and I think this takes a little bit of work, so if you have a diversity team, this might be a good thing to work on with them, is think about your virtual meetings in a way that you could give everyone on the call a chance to speak and think. One of the things I really loved about Twitter, and it took me a minute to get there because being an extrovert, I'm just used to like blabbing out my question in the middle. I don't care how many people on the call, I just talk, right? And expect somebody to zero in on me. But one of the things I loved is that there are guidelines around virtual meetings where you had to, click on the raise your hand button. You couldn't just start talking. We would actually, as a team, work on a virtual document together. So somebody would present something and we were told to give our feedback. And the way in which that would happen is we would have 15 minutes for everybody to go in and comment on the person's document. We had moments where the only way we met was through a virtual document. So everyone would have a chance to think and be on their own and respond. So think about very creative ways virtually to bring all voices in. It isn't always, I'm an extrovert in person, I'm an extrovert online, and so I get to be who I am. No, it's really thinking about everyone needs a space in which they can contribute.
Thank you for summarizing that. That's super. Allison, we think we should, as we bring this to a close, also just acknowledge the impact of external stresses. So, like the election right now, on what leaders could or should be doing. What do you think?
I think we would be remiss if we don't talk about the election and what people can be thinking about, especially during this time. It is, it's not a doubt that it's 100% had a significant toll on a lot of people.
Yeah.
Leaders need to be especially mindful
Yeah.
of, how the politic piece speeds and, spills into the workplace.
Yeah.
And it's really about, again, just whoever you voted for, creating a safe space for everyone to feel as if, they still matter.
Yeah.
And no one needs to, we don't all need to be on the same side of politics, but we do all need to work together.
Yes.
So that we can build, again, products and programs and services that, our organization is trying to sell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would just say creating that safe space, making sure people still feel included, not walking around with your, specific hats on to celebrate your win. Probably not the best way to promote safe space, but just keeping everything neutral, I think is super important. What are some others that you have?
Well, I think just acknowledging that it has an impact, regardless, again, of whether you voted or how you voted, but that it's a thing that's happened. It's like COVID, like you couldn't not talk about it. So as a leader, again, to see if I am going to acknowledge this, let me be clear around, let it be in service of what? I'm not just talking about it because I should, because I see somebody is perhaps suffering, or I see somebody who's perhaps confused about why they're being alienated, or I see, I want to be able to call it out. I'm responsible for my people, whatever's happened out there and however it's landed on them. So that could be, it doesn't have to be done in a big public forum. Just have your eyes and ears open to what your people will need, what they all need, what they each need. Is there something unique and different there? So I think less about now I need to have a big team meeting and mandate how we should or shouldn't be talking about what happened. Just pay attention because it's there and ask the question because it's happened. People have an opinion, whether they like it or not. So it's that kind of be bold as a leader to be able to lean into that.
It's interesting because I think I disagree slightly with you. I actually do think there is something about having some ground rules around political conversations.
Okay.
And, that allows the leader to keep the workplace neutral.
Sure.
And I do think that having some communication boundaries,
right.
Even if it means something like flexibility in a schedule to, if you want to talk about things, talk about it. But I do think that there needs to be some management around political conversations in the workplace, and really having those guidelines around boundaries in which you communicate on these topics.
Right.
I think it's also a good idea to recognize that a lot of the things that are to come will impact a lot of communities in different ways. And so where you have the ability to allow some flexibility in schedules to accommodate any emotional or mental health that may come toward people.
Yeah.
And, I don't think we should underestimate the things that could potentially come out of changes that are to come for the future.
Yeah.
And you need to recognize, don't assume, but recognize that different folks may be impacted in different ways. And so again, just creating that opportunity for resilience and, empathy from a leadership perspective, I think is just essential. And it should be something that's there all the time, but certainly through this time and to time to come, I think it's just important to recognize that you're going to have to lean into that and keep it sort of judge free. I think it's going to be super important.
It's a nice combination between you and me here is in our response to that. So what I'm hearing is as a leader, when we're talking about how do we respond to what will happen and is happening politically and how it impacts wellness, is what are some general and general guidelines and rules and safety around neutrality or flexibility of time that can be set or even mandated by a leader. And then what's the double click into that of then is what can a leader do specifically for individuals and acknowledge the impact that it may be having on them. So it's like it's two sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
What's my responsibility for my team and to the organization to keep this a safe work environment? And then how do I pay attention to my individuals?
I think, again, I'll just say what I just said. Leaders have the unique opportunity to foster resilience. And that's even in our mission for this podcast, right?
It is,
and all of those qualities are just essential and drive great or promoting great leadership.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to close us out?
Yeah, sure. So our third in 5, talking about wellness and workplace wellness, and to those leaders who are feeling all kinds of things right now, we're with you. We care. We are deeply committed to what you're doing around developing yourself, paying attention to yourself as a leader, so you can care for your own physical, mental, emotional well-being. And then also for what you're doing for your people, because it matters to them. Mm-hmm. So, to come back to your calling and responsibility of a leader is not to be overwhelmed by what is happening externally, but to keep that in a blurry focus out there and to say, what choice do you have now? I trust you've heard Allison and I share and maybe spark some ideas for you around real tangible things you can do that will model and that will really show your people you care very deeply about how they are physically and emotionally, so that you can be a powerful and strong and resilient leader for your organization. So thank you for joining us. Please subscribe, please follow, please share with people in your network, with your peers. And we look forward to our next podcast in a week. Thank you so much. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dean.